No.
because my wife would not have been happy. But yeah, it's part of the fun of living in, right? It's part of the fun of living in Southern
Do
California.
they know what started it?
Yeah, you're not gonna like it when I tell you. Homeless encampment.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not
Yeah.
surprised.
Yeah, they think they're not positive, but they said they found them up there. They found some homeless encampments out there. So, but I'll tell you, I was talking to John Shaver while this was going on, and he was 18 months out of losing everything. And I'm telling you, obviously I felt, it makes me feel even more for him. But the crazy thing is when you think about, look, there's homes in the canyons in Los Angeles area that are always at risk. That's just part of it. You know that. But his house was in the flats of Pacific Palisades. Never should have been, that never should have happened. And the mismanagement of what happened during that fire. Look, I don't, it's a done deal. But and again, I don't think I wouldn't just lay all the blame with Karen Bass, but this was years of mismanagement with LA Fire Department to have a reservoir that's empty, to not have the plan in place. I know that the weather was bad and the winds and everything, but I got to tell you the difference between the way the county handled this versus the way the LA city handles it, folks, it's not close to being the same. It's we are very lucky, those of us who are in the Santa Clarita area, we're very lucky to have not the leadership and the situation like that. And not the least of which, folks, we've got a lot of people in the fire departments of LA and of LA County that live in our neighborhood, right? So it really helps when they're your neighbors. I remember 12, 13 years ago when we had really bad fires in Santa Clarita, where we had that same thing happen where it came all the way into our back. The guy who lived across the street from me was the assistant fire chief of LA, John Callahan of blessed memory. He was a great guy, and he lived across the street. So when you have the guy across the street whose home is there, I got to tell you that also is going to protect you as well. So again, I don't want this is not about politics, and I don't mean to say that it's one person was to blame because a lot of people were to blame what happened in LA. But what happened in LA is a shonda. It's an embarrassment and really a indictment of LA politics. And yeah,
Right.
it's not the way things should be in
I
our
don't I
community.
don't live there, so tell me exactly what happened. And I wasn't at class yesterday. I don't know if there was a class.
Oh yeah, we had class like yesterday, and you missed it because we talked about the Akeda, and you love the Akeda, and I
I
reminded
do. I
I
do.
reminded the people what you asked last time, which was what does the word Moriah mean? So I reminded people what Mount Moriah meant. Will you remember what it means?
No.
You asked the question. I went back
I
4 years
know.
ago.
I
No,
know.
it's the word for morah, to teach, uh,
Yeah.
like Torah,
Yeah.
Moriah. Anyways, the same root.
Well, I
No,
was
we,
going to
we
say
did
that.
have class. We did have class, and as I said, the fire that we had Tuesday in Stevenson Ranch was very localized. And again, it was nowhere near as bad. It was like 30 acres. It was all brush. No homes were destroyed, and it was very well controlled. And I saw how well it was controlled. We did have some weather. We did have some winds, and so I can tell you that we were worried. I mean, I was watching it. I didn't evacuate. Tracy did, but I will tell you that um, we were definitely. It was a tight one. I would say that I would have as I mentioned just now, seeing as how I'm going to be gone with some of you are going to be on this trip to Europe. Wish all of you could come. For the next 3 weeks, we're off class. I'm glad it happened when I was here, and so that my wife was not by herself and dealing with that. You know, would have been
Some
would
of
have
my
been.
worst memories are being evacuated,
Yeah,
and can you imagine if you're evacuated and nobody was home, people lost everything up in the mountains in Arrowhead,
yeah.
because
No,
they
I know
weren't
you
home.
lived out there in San
Yeah.
Bernardino Canyon, and I mean San Bernardino County, and yeah, there's a lot of homes in the canyons, and we have friends like, and some of them like the um Karen's mother and father, the Silvers, who lived out there for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people that were part of Temple Emmanuel out in San Bernardino, and they lost homes. I mean, people lost homes up in that area, and we had bad fires up in Arrowhead, and
That fire would leap from tree to tree and the trees just explode.
yeah.
It's just terrifying.
No, it's a traumatic thing, and I mean when you see the fire, and in this case, I heard I could hear the fire, right? I could hear it, and
Yeah.
that's not good.
No.
So tonight we're finishing up American Jewelry, and we're finishing up uh, over the last several weeks. We've been talking about history. We've been talking about Jewish history, the history of Israel, the history of America. When we come back, we're going to change gears. We're going to move into some subjects that, in some cases, I've never even thought about. But one of them we're going to talk. We're going to talk about Jewish music, Jewish art. Uh, we're going to talk about Jewish. I'm going to share with you a wonderful documentary that came out recently about Jews in space. What's going to happen when we have um, Jewish people living on other planets, which we might be closer to than you might have thought. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Jews in film and TV and comic books. And so we're going to be talking about a little bit about that. And then eventually, it was interesting because Elise had sent me an article about the Jews of Uzbekistan and the Silk Road of Samarkand and Tashkent. And we are going to talk about some Jewish communities in the future that we don't talk about a lot, like the Jews of China, the Jews of India, the Jews of some of the Sephardic communities and the Mizrahi communities. We don't talk about. So we're not done with history, but we definitely have been in the midst of history over um, the last couple of months. And I want to just say too, before we jump into American Jewish history, um, a lot of people have seen over the last couple of days a very important development in the history and future of Israel, because as we just emerged out of this war, a lot of people are talking about the memo of understanding, what's signed, what's happening. A lot of people have asked me about what I think might happen. And I don't want to obfuscate on this, but I will tell you that the way we have to look at this to some extent is that um, the agreement that is, I guess, now been signed or electronically signed is a is kind of was not where a victory was going to be won anyways. Um, every time you sign an agreement and there's going to be some kind of capitulation unless it's a Treaty of Versailles type situation. You're not going to get, and we by the way we know how that wound up. You're not going to get something that you're going to feel comfortable about, and you'll walk away with a feeling like you won. Egypt and Israel definitely didn't feel that way after the Camp David Accords, but the reality is that because I would say the major objective, I would have said would have been the greatest victory would have been the dismantling of the Iranian regime. That didn't happen, and it didn't seem really as close as we would have liked it to happen during this war. That didn't happen, and so then now you have to look at what you're willing to do, what we're willing to do. I will say, moving forward, again, I don't know what will happen, whether personally, everybody knows there's a 60-day a window here for more negotiations. I wouldn't be surprised at the end of 60 days that there was more warfare. I wouldn't be surprised if there was more warfare before the 60 days are up. Nothing in nowadays would surprise me. In the age that we're in right now, nothing would surprise me. So even if the memo of understanding says certain things, we have a president who will do what he feels he wants to do in that moment, and and so I have no idea. I have no idea what this means. I do think that you have to look at the victories or the whatever Israel achieved. They achieved during the last 2 years, 3 years, and I think those are some substantial achievements. The problem is that Israelis are as a whole, the country is too smart to not understand what's happening, and will be Israelis are you're going to see a lot of the comments are going to be, well, what did we really achieve here? And so Israelis are not going to be celebrating this at all. And
Remind me,
so,
I'm feeling depressed. Remind me what was achieved here. This is the Obama deal all over again.
well, a lot of people say, hey, it's worse because Iran's getting even more money. But I would say this: um, what was achieved was a very heavy pounding that Iran took. Israel also achieved tremendous victories against Hezbollah. Uh, a lot of people say, well, Hezbollah is almost over the tipping point where it can't come back. And most people in Lebanon don't want it to come back. So that's the difference. Is there's a wherewithal and a desire for Hezbollah to be gone in Lebanon by the Lebanese people. Iran doesn't seem to be there enough of a popular support to overturn the government right now. Again, that could change, and the fear is that by giving Iran more money, the regime will be able to hold on longer because they get to hold on. I will say this: creating a situation where Iran is dependent on the United States and on these kind of deals, the advantage, of course, is that they become dependent and they want to have that money continue to flow, and it only flows if they behave. I do believe their regime is eventually doomed anyways, but the question is, do they get to hang on longer now because of it? I don't. It's anyone who tells you they know is lying. So again, I don't think there was really going to be a better. Am I disappointed? I guess, but I'm not surprised, and I'm also not despondent over it. Again, Gail, you can make the argument: is this any better deal than what Obama worked out? And I would say this: the difference is that, and again, I'm not saying positive, negatively about Trump, but the Iranians do not know at any given moment whether there will be bombs raining back down on them. Under Obama's administration, they were pretty sure that there was never going to be a bomb that's going to fall on them. They do not believe that anymore. And so that is a big difference, a big difference. And again, will that matter? Will that need to matter? We don't, nobody knows. I will tell you that in Lebanon there's been a major shift, and Israel will attack Lebanon whenever they want, anytime they want. I know Trump has told them not to, and don't be so tough, and don't blow up everything he just said it today again. And so there's a fear that Trump is going to rein in rein in Israel in Lebanon. I don't believe that's the case. Israel still has the objective of having peace with Lebanon, having Hezbollah be completely neutralized and be stripped of their weapons. Most, even Shiite Muslims, even the people that Hezbollah comes from, even those people understand that Hezbollah as a force is done. And the question is whether, if they're allowed to disarm over 2 years rather than 6 months or 2 months or whatever it is, will they really ever disarm? And that's the question. And so Israel, I honestly believe, though, um, is not going to stop bombing Lebanon and doing what they have to do. There'll be Israeli soldiers there. This does not mean Israeli soldiers are going to have to be withdrawn, as Iran is saying. That's not happening. It's not happening. I've checked today again. There is no massive troop movements out of Lebanon right now. So that's just not happening. I do believe this is probably the last act of Netanyahu, though. I believe that most Israelis are gonna say this is a bad deal. That
That was my
Netanyahu,
next question.
yeah,
Yeah.
Netanyahu, and I know everybody asks. I believe he's kind of done anyways, but I do believe that he will be done. I believe and I hope that the next prime minister will be Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett was raised in the United States. He's not as politically connected as Netanyahu is, but he understands Americans. He understands the current president. He understands the dynamics here. And so I do believe that Bennett will be a good prime minister. He did not serve for very long the last time he served. When we talked about Israel's prime ministers, he was there during a unity government that was basically there only to get rid of Netanyahu. And so he's conservative. He was part of Likud, and now he represents a breakaway, other right um, party, another conservative party, but one that's not does not like Netanyahu. So I believe that Bennett will probably be the next prime minister, and I believe it's not going to be I don't think Israel's going to come up in a bad situation from this. So I know a lot of people are worried about it. They're upset about it. They're saying, well, what was the purpose of this? You have to look at the totality of what Israel was able to achieve. And at the end of the day, one of the things that Israel did, and this is historic, this is why we're talking about it right now. This is the history of Israel. Israel and the United States, for the first time, coordinated attacks on another country. And it shows that the potential for that to happen again will always be there, because everyone can say, but it happened. Does it need to happen again? Will it happen again? I don't know, but it happened, and it teaches not just Iran, but Saudi Arabia or any other country in the Middle East that wants to get out of, that wants to stop behaving like a reasonable nation, that the United States and Israel have a history now of being able to coordinate a joint attack. Okay, so that's done. That's history. And that is something that we have to understand is a major victory for Israel. Is it everything we wanted? No. But on the other hand, we are not in the same situation that we were 10 years ago when we had to deal with Iran, pump money into their government and gave them their money, the money that we were holding hostage. All of that is not it's not the same situation, folks. I know you're going to say, well, we're giving the money, we're going to, it's a whole completely different situation.
But
Okay.
what about the fact that they can control the Strait of Hormuz anytime they want?
Well, that was the case anyways, Esther.
But they didn't do it before.
I understand, but
Actually, that's not an honest statement.
What?
That's not an honest statement, Esther.
Okay.
They can't no. Now I'm going to chime in. They can't control it anytime they want. The U.S. just held back. That's all. Our munitions, our firepower, our ability to do what we need to do is much stronger than anyone on this planet right now.
Okay, but John,
So
but
the United
no
States
question.
had to show some restraint.
There's no
Okay?
question that that's true. But the question of whether Iran can do what they did, which is
They can do it. They can do it briefly. I guarantee you, there was debates inside rooms. Or do we? Do we not? Do we? What do we do? Do we not? And at the end of the day, restraint was. Otherwise, we would have just taken Cargyle day one. Day one, we would have just taken.
Of course. But John,
the problem is people
John,
can't.
Here's the
can't
point.
withstand casualties.
Sorry, someone just rang my bell. I'll be right back.
Sorry,
but John, the point is that situation existed before, it exists now, and again, the issue of whether the United States will attack Iran if they do something like that is now well established, and I think that's the most important thing. Is we take away from this the understanding that Iran knows that we mean business if we say we're going to do something. This is not just a matter of holding their funds. We will bomb
this
them.
at least under this administration,
Okay,
good or bad.
fine. But look, in the long term, everybody knows we have different administrations. We now have a track record. The United States has finally, folks, the United States, after 50 years, finally did something to Iran to actually hold them accountable and to punish them. Because the only way you can really punish people, you can hold their funds, which they didn't like, obviously, and they don't like it. I wouldn't like it if I were them. And again, it's just natural. But there's a huge difference between that and blowing up 85% of their military. So this is, or whatever, parts of their 85% of parts of their military. So the point is that they were hit, and they were hit hard, and they know it can happen. And again, you're right, John. They may not think another administration will do it, but also the calculation for any other administration is, well, Trump did it, we can do it too. So everybody knows it can be done. And that overall is a good thing when we're dealing with a regional bully and a regional problem like Iran. Understand that regional problem and bully of Iran has not gone away. And so from that standpoint, this was not a total victory. And it's disappointing. And for everybody who wants the people of Iran, like I do, to have freedom and for them to have the same kinds of things that people in Israel enjoy, which is the ability to travel to other countries, to not be led by a theocratic, you know, toxic regime that, you know, that where people live in constant fear of not wearing a head covering. For people like that who are being held hostage by their government, it's not a victory. It's a terrible thing for the Iranian people. But again, I don't know. I obviously we didn't in the United States have the will to have that kind of war. And again, I maybe it's just not the time, folks. I don't know what to say, but I'm not despondent. I'm definitely gonna hopefully I'm hopeful, and I'm also like I said, I think we witnessed history over the last 3 months. We've witnessed history. What was it painful? Yeah. Nobody likes to pay money for gas. No one likes the inflation that it caused. And I'm not saying that. No one likes even a handful of American casualties, which there were. No one wants that. But at the same time, I think we were overall very successful. And I don't want people, because of politics or because of their hatred of Trump or because they're distrustful of governments in particular, understand that history was made over the last few months and we witnessed it. And do we know how Israel will look after this? No, but we do know that Israel's most existential threat suffered tremendous pain, Iran, and Israel scored major victories over the last 2 years over Hezbollah. The pagers, the dismantlement of their leadership, the death of their, I mean, I'm saying dismantlement, the destruction and death of almost all of the Hezbollah leadership. Those are real victories that Israel had.
But
And that,
public opinion about Israel has taken a big hit, and I don't think the American government and most Americans are as afraid of Iran as we are.
there's no question. Most Israelis, they've been living under an existential threat from Iran for the better part of 40, 35, 40 years since Iran did no longer was fighting with Iraq ever since Israel became their biggest enemy. Yeah, Israelis have lived with that kind of existential threat. I don't think they're as I mean the Israelis I talk to are not as afraid of Iran right now as they were 2 years ago, a year ago, even 6 months ago. So is it total peace? Is it total peace of mind? Is it total lack of waking up and saying, hey, today is the day that an Iranian missile is going to hit us, a possible nuclear missile will hit us? No, it's not over. And the day that Iran and Israel have peace will be a wonderful day and it'll be a cause of celebration. We are not necessarily closer today than we were 2 years ago, but we might have that happen when the government changes. So
I just don't think most Americans see Iran as the threat
you're you're
that
you're
we
absolutely
do.
you're absolutely right. But there's nothing we can do about that, Gail. There's most Americans are not worried. We live with no fear over every country and over any country until obviously we get hit by a 9/11 type thing, and then we worry about it for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And then we stop worrying about it. But yeah, Iran is an existential threat to the United States because if they had the weapons, the weapon capability, if they had the money and the ability to do so, they would do bad things to us as much as they could. So I hope that they're a little bit more worried about it today. So with that, let's talk about American Jews for a little bit because that's who we are and that's where we're at. And that is, I want to kind of talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is the movements. Oh yeah, the Schulmans point out that the Starmer backed away from assisting in minesweeping when he said he would. Yeah, Starmer, by the way, is about the best person that England could put out for at least the Jewish community. But yeah, he has no spine whatsoever, and he's also trying to hold on to a government, which, by the way, right now England in the next national elections is there's going to be some very interesting things happen. England potentially will have a very far right wing prime minister. It's very possible. They it's that's a whole nother thing that we'll see, which yeah, England might swing. We don't know for sure. Nobody knows for sure, but Starmer's very unpopular. His wife is Jewish. He's actually, for a labor leader, very pro for him, for where he is. He's actually pretty pro-Israel and pretty good on the Jewish community. But the Jewish community there has continuously gotten more and more afraid. They've suffered more and more attacks, and it's not a good situation for English Jews. I'll be there a month from now. I'll be there with my or 3 weeks. I'll be there with my wife's family, and the next generation, my kids, essentially my nieces and my niece and nephew, those people that live in England, they're probably, they will not end up raising kids or staying in England. They'll either come to the United States or they'll go to Israel. That's a sad situation in England. Anyways, today, folks, I'm talking about.
Can you go back to that document you had up?
Oh yeah, I'm going to get to that. That's actually, I jumped a little bit ahead.
Okay.
I will share the Pittsburgh platform in a second, but I actually I want to first give you the lay of the land, which is this is this is a map of America with a breakdown of where the largest where the movements have their largest um, populations. So you can see there's pink, red, and blue, and then there's the gray, which is a lot of America, especially like this area where there aren't enough Jews to even make to be able to come up with levels. But you see the red is the Orthodox. Yeah.
Is the blue spot in Idaho, is that just the Monheims?
No, this is actually, they're up here. They're in the place where there are no Jews.
Okay.
My cousin somehow is in South Dakota. I'm going to have to tell him that there's a Jew besides him in South Dakota. But yeah, no, here's LA. So this shows you that we have a little bit of an Orthodox community. So
what big Orthodox community is there in Oregon?
Interestingly, that's the area around. That's not even the area around Portland, right? Portland's up here.
Yeah.
So this is, I think they're including the area around Salem and Eugene.
Oh.
Salem, Eugene, that's around the college.
I can't imagine any Orthodox in Vegas.
Well, no, there is today, but it's definitely not. It's not large enough to make
the map. But there's conservative congregations all over at Los Angeles.
Yeah. No, the only reason that they're showing the red is because there's enough Jews in that area, enough Orthodox Jews in that area. And again, most of these areas where there's an Orthodox community, there's a huge Jewish community. I mean, this one over here, the ones in Colorado are the areas around Denver, but the area around Oregon, I mean, those are unusual because there is no other Jewish community. But the red pockets here are areas where there's, especially in the East Coast, the areas around Maryland, about DC, this area around New Jersey and New York, northern.
What does the pink represent, Rabbi?
What?
Conservative.
What is the pink?
The pink is conservative.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
So you have areas normally like South Florida where you'll have an Orthodox community, but again, what this does is it allows us to kind of say, well, there's at least some Orthodox Jews in that area. Again, the larger areas, especially on the West, where you see pretty much only Reform, obviously there's Orthodox and conservative Jews in that area. There's just not that many. So, I found that map to be kind of an interesting, like nothing really shocking in that map, because the understanding that most of us live on the West Coast, the East Coast, and Southern Florida is part of the reality of where Jews came from and
yeah, but I love the fact. Look at it, Middle America. I would never have guessed all that. Never.
That every one of those places you see, right, is a pretty major city. So it
Okay.
hasn't, we talked about it over the last couple of weeks, the suburban expansion of the Jewish community, which also kind of matched Jews moving not just to the suburbs, but to the West Coast and to, places like Denver or Portland or Vegas or Phoenix, Scottsdale area, moving west primarily, but also to the south, to Florida and into Atlanta. The movement of Jewish community and to Texas, like the Schulmans, the movement of Jews to some of these areas where there wasn't a large Jewish community before World War II also kind of matched suburban expansion where people that were, let's say, they lived in New York, they moved out to Long Island or they moved to Westchester, so that there was directional movement out of state, but also Jewish communities that were moving, cross country, suburban growth and also expansion across the country. Again, some of the cities, and even cities like Denver and St. Louis and Chicago, that had Jewish communities, and San Francisco for that matter, that where Jews started moving out there in the 1860s, 1880s. Some of those German Jews that were merchants and people like Levi Strauss, and again you can look at people like the Goldwaters, Barry Goldwater's family that moved to Arizona to be merchants. Those German Jews oftentimes opened up stores, which would then become a department store, those kinds of things. But the major movements of Jews to those areas really happened after World War II, and as Jews started moving out of the cities. And so as that happened, we see the beginning of synagogues and communities in in terms of looking at. Let me just show you this map real quickly. So if we look at
I forgot there's Jews in West Virginia.
yeah, well,
Come
there used to,
on.
percentage wise, there used to be more, but
Wow.
this is by county, and you can see that LA and San Diego County here in California for Californians is pretty high. The areas of Miami, um, Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach, um, that those counties are are all obviously large Jewish communities. And then, of course, in terms of real numbers, this is in terms of real numbers, you see that the cities of New York, Philadelphia, Boston, the area around D.C., um, and then of course Chicago. Those are the areas where we see large communities, but we still have places like Seattle, Phoenix area, Vegas, one of the fastest growing Jewish communities in the country, San Francisco, and then of course here we have Dallas, where the Schulmans are, and Houston, which are large urban areas. All these circles represent large urban areas where, again, we see a pretty substantial Jewish community. Minneapolis, St. Louis, the
Can you
places.
go over Pennsylvania?
Yeah, yep.
So that's interesting, right? That they elected a governor and they don't really have a large population.
No, I mean, look, the Philly area over here. I mean, this is not Philly. That's New Jersey. But Philly's here. Pittsburgh is here. And of course, like most of the state in between is there aren't a lot of Jews. So yeah, it is an interesting situation because it's not like California or New York or New Jersey for that matter, where there is a large Jewish community. I mean, there's no blue there,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Of course, Chicago you can see has a
Yeah.
pretty big blue area, and of course they have Pritzker. Um, Boston has had, uh, they haven't had too many Jews representing it on a national level, but yeah, Pennsylvania obviously is an interesting situation, um, and of course you got South Florida, which the Jewish community there has not, I would say, been represented on a statewide level too much. But remember, Florida is a massive state with lots of areas. This whole area, the Panhandle, there are no Jews. So,
Well, there's vacationing Jews.
so this Panhandle, this area from Tampa all the way up and around, and again, you have a couple of areas around Jacksonville that have a Jewish community, but overall, a lot of the state is not, and a lot of the state still, as you know, is a pretty southern conservative state. There's a whole lot of Florida once you get out of South Florida that isn't that's like is much like Mississippi or Georgia.
Well, it's funny you say that. I have relatives in southern Florida. You know what they say?
What?
The farther north you go, the farther south you are.
Yeah, that's a Florida. That's one of the South Florida Jewish reflections. I would say is not, and it's true.
So,
So,
Rabbi,
yeah,
I can tell you also that San Diego being in blue is really interesting because
Yeah.
when my family moved there, like 1960, 1961,
yeah,
it would be gray.
yep, yep. I was there, Philip, when I went to school in the 80s in at UCSD, and I saw it happen. I actually saw and I had an aunt and uncle who lived in Encinitas since the early 70s. So I saw it change. I was there, and my cousins grew up there, and they know. I mean, they lived in North County. Uh, I saw it change, and it changed in the area where your family lives now.
Yeah.
That North County, especially the area around Del Mar Heights, that area all picked up in the late 80s, early 90s, and I saw it happen. I mean, I witnessed the San Diego Jewish community go from kind of off the not on the radar, so to speak, to being on the radar. And Vegas is doing that now. Vegas is grown like that. And the other city that's grown like that, not so much Portland, but Seattle. Seattle has become an area where the Jewish community in the last 30 years, a lot of obviously a lot of that reasons because of the tech in Seattle.
Yeah, a
But
lot of it, well, a lot of the Jewish infrastructure in the North County is due to Qualcomm.
no doubt, no doubt. And there were Jews involved in that, obviously. Erwin Jacobs, Andrew Viterbi,
Yeah.
the Jewish leadership of Qualcomm didn't hurt because they were very generous philanthropically. But the numbers of people, it's partly because of tech, but I also, and there was a huge amount of tech, but there were a lot of other Jews that moved to San Diego to be doctors and lawyers. And because San Diego became, it still is one of the nicest places in the country to live. And so Jews,
Oh, it's God's
I
country
think,
down there.
I think
Love it.
discretionary income, Philip, almost more than anything else, brought a lot of Jews there. And I've seen a lot of Jews go there if they can to retire. It is, as John just said, it is God's country. It is,
Weather
an
perfect.
interesting thing to see. And it is. It's the closest, has the most days closer to 72 degrees than any other city in America. So it
I,
is.
Rabbi, just real quick, years ago I worked with a meteorologist when I worked in journalism,
Uh-huh.
and I asked him. He had lived all over the world, and he had been a meteorologist for the old Pan Am Airways. And I asked him, "Where in the world is the best weather?"
Yeah.
He looked at me without a beat. He said, "San Diego."
Yeah. No, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, and again, unfortunately for Philip, because he grew up there when there weren't a lot of Jews, and so it was not a
It
fun.
was not easy.
It was not
It was
fun.
not easy. Today it's so different, but back then, there were only two Jews in my elementary school, myself and a girl named Sherry, and every Easter, um, well, until I got into middle school, I got beat up because they told me I killed Jesus.
Yeah.
That was routine.
I know that was San Diego. Listen, I'm going to tell you, I've had people who grew up in San Diego who told me the same thing.
But by
And
the
by the way, I just want to tell you, Philip, it's not uncommon for the people who grew up in San Diego not to live there anymore because it was not easy.
I
And
mean, that's one of the reasons I left.
no, but a
But
lot of people in their minds, they associate San Diego with a lot of backwards kind of, thinking and small-mindedness. So yeah, you're not uncommon. It's interesting when I see people, they tell me they grew up in San Diego. I'm like, why'd you leave? He goes, oh, you don't know. You don't know what it's like to grow up there. So I think it's changed a little bit, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not. I haven't talked with people in there who came there and grew up there in their 80s and 90s, the 30-year-olds. I don't know if they're staying there. It's a good question. But I think, it's interesting too, because I think a lot of people, they want to be in Los Angeles because they want to be around the Dodgers. No, I'm just kidding. Not it's not just no,
That's
but
why
I
they go
mean
to San Diego. What are you talking
I
about?
think a lot of people, I know my cousins who grew up there, they really looked at San Diego like a small town. They really, one of them lives here. My one cousin lives here in LA, and another cousin lives back in New Hampshire, but they really did look at it as kind of a parochial. And they grew up there in the late 70s or really the 80s. They grew up there. And yeah, they didn't they think of it as as like a
When
backwards
Joe
town.
was stationed there in San Diego.
I'm just saying. I
Yeah.
mean,
Joe was
I was
stationed.
stationed in at Pendleton. I had one other Jew. One other
Yeah,
Jew.
There was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism
there was.
in San Diego in the 60s, even into the 70s. I don't know about the 80s because by then I had left. But, but growing up, I can tell you in the 60s and early 70s, it was really
Yeah,
in the
that's when we were there in the 70s, and it was very anti-Semitic. It was really a Navy town, you know. It was
well,
just very
I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to say
well.
that's
I would because we were in the Navy. Yes.
I didn't want to say that that was why it was a little bit small town mindedness, but there was yeah, I didn't say it. Okay, so I just want to make it clear I didn't say it, but yes, it was that was part of it. Was there was a little bit of that. But let's hope that that's more history. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that the military has a lot less impact on the area than it used to. There's a lot less people, percentage wise, who are involved in the military there in San Diego. It's diluted. Anyways, and I hopefully that it's not like that as much anymore in the military. At least the people that I know, like the Steins, who have a son who was in the Navy for many years, and I just did a officiated a wedding for a wonderful young woman who just was discharged about 5 weeks ago. She said she didn't have any problems, but you know, look, I know that there's not always been the case in the military, in any branch of the military. There's been,
I
you know,
only had one problem, and it wasn't even it wasn't even in the United States. We were in Diego Garcia at the time, long time ago.
Diego Garcia, which played a little role in
Yeah,
our
it
last
did.
dust
Yeah, it
up.
did.
Anyways, so let's take a look. I put up the Pittsburgh principles back up here, and this is this is um, and yeah, Joyce posted that she definitely had anti-Semitism when her family was in the Marines. Her her father was a gunnery sergeant. Anyways, so talking about the movements, the denominations in Judaism that reflect this. Again, as I showed you the population, I I feel that to some extent, to understand the denominations and what denomination Jews are a part of, it is very much a situation of looking at geography. Some people would say, well, it's about philosophy, it's about it's about theology. I say no. What it comes down to is where people live, and that's why I showed you that map. Orthodox communities are a community, and they work to some extent because of the geography and of the fact that there are enough Orthodox people in an area to have, for example, a kosher butcher, to have, and again, some people would say an eruv, you know, the fence, the legal fiction that creates an area where people can carry within a boundary. All of those kinds of issues of lifestyle are very much have a great impact on the denominations and how Judaism has grown and thrived and at the end of the day how it really is. So I do believe geography has a lot to say and has a lot to do with it. The Reform movement actually started in Germany in the 1800s. Its origins are in Germany. And so when the first German Jewish immigrants started making their way to the United States in the 1840s, 1850s, 18, that second wave, remember the first wave was Sephardic. They're Sephardic Jews. They're Orthodox for the most part. They live in a religious they live with a religious tradition that is they keep kosher and they do their best to maintain, but there's not a lot of other Jews. And so a lot of the Sephardic community actually kind of disappears by the early 19th century. They've already started dissipating a little bit because there just weren't enough of them. So while they were Orthodox, in practice, a lot of them just have children and grandchildren who they just don't find Jews to marry. The Reform movement, as it comes out here and migrates with the Jews of Germany, that second wave, there is definitely an interest to try to create a situation so that Jews can be Jews, but at the same time live as Americans. While Reform Judaism initially was trying to help Jews in Europe, primarily, as we said, after Napoleon in the early 1800s, this move to integrate and assimilate into society, Reform Judaism came out of that attempt. And while the Reform movement hadn't numerically gotten that big by the 1850s, 1860s, there were Jews that grew up with that tradition in Germany who brought it to the New World and who felt comfortable with uh, definitely a more assimilationist type movement. But it took a while for the Reform movement in this country to really assert itself and to really become what we would call a movement.
Did you deposit any checks today?
So
Okay.
when we look at the movement itself, and to think about how Reform Judaism started in America, it is, and like we're going to talk about with the other movements too, it really is the work of a person. And in this case, it's a person who is was born in Germany in 1819. His name is Isaac Mayer Wise. It's not Stephen S. Wise. There was also, of course, a very famous Reform rabbi named Stephen S. Wise. Um, and and they're not related. They're not. This is not part of the Stephen S. Wise that the synagogue in L.A. is named after. But Isaac Mayer Wise immigrates to the United States. He comes to United States after already becoming a rabbi in Europe. So he was originally from Germany, but the part of Germany that was then part of would go on to become part of the is now part of the Czech Republic, Bohemia, and of course the Germans took it. And one of the first things that Hitler did when he invaded European countries was take that part of the Sudetenland, that part of the Czech Republic. The reason I say that, of course, is we're going to be there in about a week and a half. Some of us, less than a week actually. About a week we'll be in Prague. But again, the Jewish community in Bohemia was also part of the upheaval that was going on in Germany at that time, and people made their way to the United States. So he came to the U.S. In his 20s, late 20s, and he came as a rabbi. He was already ordained, and he went to Albany, New York, and he was there for about 10 years. And during that time in Albany, which is, upstate New York, it's definitely not New York City, and it's its own community, right? And especially in the 1800s, it was, there's not even train yet that is going there when he's there. Uh, he starts making reforms in his community in Albany, which included things like counting women as part of a minyan, having men and women sit together, um, and having a choir that didn't just have men, it also had women. And even though, again, he was very knowledgeable of Jewish tradition, he starts really trying to come up with an American Jewish movement form of Judaism that would work in this country. He loved this country. He loved the United States, and he wanted um, he wanted American Jews to become more unified, more stable, and he really did see the potential here in the United States of creating something very important. Now, the feeling today about Isaac Mayer Wise was that he might have gone too far, that he might have instituted too much change and too much dramatic um, upheaval that, in a sense, would make American Judaism too different from traditional Judaism. So what he did, and again, there already were other Reformed synagogues here in the United States, but he wanted them to all be unified. He wanted there to be a union of Reformed synagogues, and that was one of the most important things he did. He created what was called the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, which he organized and eventually
This is when
centered.
they had the Trafe banquet.
I'm getting to that. That's
Okay,
that's coming up.
okay.
That was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations was established as the union of those congregations, um, and that was established in 1873. And so these would be a way for synagogues to stay in touch, to be able to have an organization. And he was in charge of that organization, the UAHC. It was the first thing he did, or one of the first things he did. The first thing he really did was he created a prayer book for the United States Jewish community, a Siddur, and he called it Minhag America, which means the American tradition, the American way, the American customs. And so he created this book so that it would be a prayer book that would standardize Reform tradition. He also created a newspaper called the Israelite, which was a way for Jewish communities to also keep in touch. And so this he did all through his base in Cincinnati. So he came after he left Albany, he established himself in Cincinnati, and this was all done in Cincinnati. So, in addition to being a congregational rabbi, this guy actually created the Reform movement. And one of the most important things he did was he also created a college. He created a rabbinical school, and it's called Hebrew Union College. It opened in 1875 as well, and it was a way for him to not only kind of standardize and organize the Jewish community, but also to control it, to essentially decide what kinds of rabbis would be there uh, to be the future. It was really for the future of Judaism. So he established it in Cincinnati in 1875. It was, of the seminaries in America, it was the first seminary in the United States that was ordaining rabbis. It doesn't mean there weren't rabbis ordained before. You could study with a rabbi and he would give you ordination. He would give you smicha, but an actual college where people would come together. Now, what's so significant about this and why it's so relevant, some of you might know this. This past month, I was just on the phone with some of the people there today. Hebrew Union College ordained its last class this last month. It's done in Cincinnati. It's not done across the country, but the campus in Cincinnati was closed. It's done. 150 years comes to an end. Now, the reason it came to an end, I'm going to tell you, the reason it came to an end is because there weren't enough people that wanted to study in Cincinnati anymore. The reason that he established it in Cincinnati in the first place in 1870 is there were no Jews out west. That was out west. And what happened is by the time we get to the 2000s, there are very few Jews that want to train in the center of United States, and they're not interested in serving in that part of the country. And so this is I'm a little bit I'm a little bit involved with this now. As most of you know, I've never considered myself a Reformed Jew. I did not train at Hebrew Union College. Um, I I never had much feeling about the denominations in general. That's why you don't hear me talk about them. I'm a Jew, not a Reform Jew, conservative Jew. I'm just Jewish. I don't like the movements as a whole. I think they've served their purpose. It's not like they never should have been here, but I think they've served their purpose. And when we see things like Hebrew Union College closing in Cincinnati, the University of Judaism, what became AJU, sold its facility 3 years ago up on Mulholland. That's now part of the Milken High School. AJU didn't close, but it's gone to an online program, and they now are renting space down in the city on the west side, where there was a larger Jewish community where most of their students lived, and so most of their students didn't live in the area around AJU, so it was not a great place for them to have to go to school. You can make the argument never should have been in Mulholland, but it was a beautiful campus. I mean, they sold it for about $60 million, I think, to in the end to Milken. But it's sad because it's another institution that's gone. And Hebrew Union College, by the way, also sold its building to USC about a year and a half ago. So HUC still has a rent. They still rent and still have an office and classes in Los Angeles. But as HUC grew, they opened up a campus in New York, and then they opened up one in Los Angeles. So they have New York and Los Angeles campus, and then of course they also opened one in Israel. So HUC still has three campuses: one in one in New York and one in Los Angeles. It's still open. The New York one has also sold its building to NYU. The reason that they're selling their buildings is because they're not doing well, folks. They're not selling their buildings because want to get into they want to get into property management. Um, they're not doing well financially. And we'll get to the conservative movement in a second, but for HUC, for the reform movement, this is history happening right now. And I want to tell you, it's happening right now. Before we look at the Pittsburgh platform, which is important, by the way, and you know this, Gail, the reason the Pittsburgh platform is important is because it led to conservative Judaism, not because it had really anything. Well, I guess it had a huge impact on Reform Judaism, but let me show you this story, though, about HUC. This, my friends, how recent is this? How about a week ago? Now, you might have read this article if you follow JTA. If you haven't, this is making news in Cincinnati and it's making news in Ohio because this beautiful building that Hebrew Union College is now not using, the reform movement is essentially being sued by the state of Ohio because they said that HUC cannot stop doing its program in Cincinnati. I don't know how this is going to play out. But essentially, the reform movement has said, look, we didn't have enough people in Cincinnati that were studying there, so we've had to move our programs to New York and Los Angeles. And so Ohio is saying, yeah, but you can't do that. You can't shutter your Ohio place because it's part of the fabric of Ohio. And you can see the Ohio Attorney General filed this motion in April to stop it. How could they even do this? Well, there is a group that is trying to start a new reform seminary in, um, as you see from this line here, the state seeks to seize HUC's assets in Ohio and redirect them to a new, yet to be decided nonprofit with a similar mission, an upstart rabbinical school founded by HUC alums that says it wants them. And that, if you look at the
Because
article,
there's nobody to represent Midwest Jews. Do you know what
yeah.
I mean? Yeah, the mid American
So,
Jews.
so here's the beautiful campus of HUC. I mean, it's not always covered in snow, by the way, I just want to say, but it is a beautiful classic campus, which again goes back to the 1800s. But you can see there is a group that wants to start a rabbinical school there. It doesn't exist yet. And they are being to some extent backed. And this article by you can see is also only 3 weeks ago. They are trying to keep a seminary there, but there's a question of like, but who's the seminary for? So HUC is definitely
That's pretty cool, actually, when you think about it.
it's a pretty wild story. Now I will tell you the reason why this is important to me is because of this, the American Jewish Archives. So those aren't necessarily going to leave, by the way, either. But you can see here at the HUC, there's a library, amazing library of Judaica, right? And then there's the Skirball Museum. Like we have a Skirball. There's a Skirball there. The Skirballs gave money for a museum everywhere. The Skirball family was so generous to the Reform movement that the Skirball campus in Los Angeles was on USC, on the USC in the on the perimeter of USC, which again HUC just sold to USC. Look, the reason that the Reform movement is selling these assets is because they have no money. So they now have created essentially enough money for them to continue to exist. But it's not a good situation. I, why it is interesting for me is because you can see there is the Marcus Center, the American Jewish Archives, which is also there. By the way, there's no, I spoke to them last week. They have no plan on leaving. So it's not like the whole campus is gone, but the rabbinical school has been closed, and I think that HUC or the Reform movement is going to retain some of that property to maintain the American Jewish Archives there. And the reason why this is important to me is because about 2 years ago, my father's archives and all the videos of his shows, of his television shows over the last since like almost 50 years, all of that now is part of the American Jewish Archives. So I am definitely concerned about it. It's not going to go. It's not going to go away, the American Jewish Archives, but it is a very important receptacle for Jewish material from across the United States over the last several hundred years of American Jewish experience. So it's not. There is a museum there. It's not necessarily like the. It's not as interactive and it's not as up to date as I just recommended somebody to go to the Philadelphia Jewish Museum. It's actually an affiliate of the Skirball. It's a wonderful Jewish museum there in Philly, right outside, right near Independence Hall. It's got a wonderful location for people who are going to Philadelphia. It's called the Weitzman Museum, and that museum in Philadelphia is amazing. But this is really where a lot of the materials are, and they also publish a quarterly. The AJA, the Archives, publishes a quarterly journal, and it's very, very important for preserving American Jewish history.
Hey,
So
Rabbi,
I do believe that it's not going to be gone. Yes,
do you think Renee Frieda went to here to the American Jewish Archives for her documentary?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if no. It's not really a Holocaust related archive, so
Oh, okay.
I'm not. I mean, it's not like they don't have some stuff about that, but it's really focusing on American Jewish history. So when when um when yeah, I'm hoping to go. I haven't been there since my father's stuff has been there. I'm interested to see, the storage area and the vaults and things that they've got there. But but back to Wise. So he that's the legacy of what Wise started. Again, a lot of people see him as, as kind of a megalomaniac, but he really you almost had to have somebody like that who was going to do all these things. He did one other thing. So he established he did the prayer book, but as far as the institutions he established the Union for American Hebrew Congregations, which again is the URJ today. That's what 20 years ago, it changed its name to Union of Reform Judaism instead of American Hebrew Congregations, because there are also Canadian congregations that were part of it and were never felt fully comfortable to be called Union of American Hebrew Congregations. There is also a worldwide movement of Reform Judaism that URJ is a part of. That's called the Union for Progressive Judaism. And so the URJ is part of that. So Reform congregations in Israel or in Europe are part of the Union for Progressive Judaism, and then and then um, so so he established the what became the URJ. He established Hebrew Union College, which again eventually grew to these other campuses.
And it's got to be said, we have a type of Judaism that isn't anywhere else in the world.
A bit with Reform Judaism.
Yeah, well, not just Reform. Yeah, but yeah, American Judaism is not like any other place in the
Yeah.
world.
And I would say that even though Reform Judaism started in Germany, it is very much a product of America.
Yeah, it's very different.
And I would say that Reform Judaism, from its outset, had an American take on things, which was because of Wise. And one of the things he saw about America was its independence, the ability for congregations to have freedom and to be able to kind of control themselves, which he didn't have an issue with. He obviously wanted there to be stable, a stable, unified movement, but he also knew that those congregations were going to be independent and would be essentially led by lay leadership. Um, which again, you can make the argument that he didn't really provide the infrastructure for the lay leadership, but he did one other thing that was really important for synagogues, if you think about it. So he started, again, these are institutions, URJ, or UHC, there comes URJ, HUC, and the third letter soup that he created was the Central Conference for American Rabbis, the CCAR, which becomes the union for the rabbis. So when the rabbis finish at HUC, they become members of CCAR, and as a part of a reform rabbinical union, they are now able to control what happens with rabbinic leadership. And so if synagogues want to go through the Reform Rabbinic Search, for example, they have to go through the URJ, and they have to be willing to go through the procedures and to hire people that are part of the CCAR. I've never been part of the CCAR. I never wanted to be part of the CCAR. I'm not part of the CCAR. I have never paid $1 to the CCAR. And again, while there's definitely advantages to be part of a union, especially when it comes to labor practices and um,
I
kind
think
of.
it's more advantageous for the rabbis than for the
Well,
congregation.
that's what I was going to say. It really doesn't help. The Rabbinical Association really doesn't help the congregations. It helps the rabbis. And I would
Right.
say to some extent, it's always been a little bit of an issue because congregations have the complete wherewithal to do whatever they want. And that has been the case. So for larger congregations like Stephen S. Weiss or Wilshire Boulevard here in Los Angeles, but every community has one. Temple Emmanuel in New York, Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco. I mean, every city had a mega synagogue where all the wealthy people were members, and those were usually obviously Reform synagogues. I want to stress that they were the earlier synagogues, and they were usually the moneyed synagogues. That the larger the synagogue was, the more power they had to pretty much do whatever they wanted. So if they didn't want to go through the HUC hiring procedures, they just didn't. And I will tell you, HUC has very strict hiring procedures, which is one of the reasons why we're not using them. We're right now in a rabbinic search, as people know. We're looking for somebody to be an associate rabbi, and we can't go through HUC because number one, the salary requirements and the benefit requirements that they place on us, we don't have. I've never had, and quite frankly, they wouldn't let us do what we're doing tomorrow or Friday. We're having a rabbinic candidate come out to kind of do an audition. The reform movement does not allow rabbis to do that. You can't do that. You can't bring in a rabbi to do a trial service for you. It's not allowed. And so if you want to go through their hiring procedures, you cannot, if you agree to go through HUC, you must hire with them. You can't do another search with the conservative movement or your own independent search. You must only exclusively do it through them. And you have to follow certain procedures, including, again, not hiring somebody who you can meet them ahead of time. You can bring them out to meet the congregation. Everybody does, but you're not allowed to have them do a trial service, which I find to be shocking. That's not the case in the conservative movement and Orthodox movement. And I promise you, we will get to those movements because it's 8/11, and I do want to get to the other movements. But the Reform movement is definitely the most corporate of the movements. It's known as to some extent, the most business-like and the most organized in a way. But it also, to me, has policies that are not great for the congregations and have they protect the rabbis, which is not a bad thing. I mean, but at the end of the day, a large synagogue is going to do whatever they want anyways. Usually, rabbinic squabbles and contract disputes don't go through a don't go through the reform movement anyways. They're usually handled locally amongst that congregation, so it very rarely escalates to an area where the reform movement's going to be involved anyways. And quite frankly, the reform movement has been completely useless when it comes to disciplining and taking care of rabbis who are responsible for sexual harassment, which to me, like, if you couldn't do that, if you couldn't handle that, and they've admitted that they've tried to fix that policy, but they didn't. They weren't able to create a situation to protect congregations from rabbis who were sexual predators. I don't really. And again, I'm not saying any movement figured it out, but I'm just or any religion figured it out. But if the Reform movement, for all their corporate and all their policies couldn't help with that. I don't have much belief in any of the movements when it comes to doing a better job. And again, it was not like the Catholic Church, and I don't like it's not been that bad in the Reform movement or in Judaism as a whole, but it shouldn't be at all. And the fact that the Reform movement didn't do a good job of dealing with it, I if they couldn't do that, like why bother? The fact that you can help rabbis have a good pension policy. Yeah, I got no time for that. So, that being said, how did the conservative movement start? Well, the conservative movement started here. So about 10 years after the reform movement started with their very important seminary, the seminary had a banquet, and a graduation banquet called it was called the Trafa banquet. And let's see where it is right here. Um, let's see where it talked about the Trafa banquet. Um, I thought it said it somewhere here, but no, I will tell you. So the, what happened at what we call the Trafa banquet was, and you know what Trafe means, right? What happened what happened at the Trafa banquet, which was held in 1883, was the reform movement in Cincinnati, in the Highland House restaurant. I wanted to get the correct name for the restaurant. The Highland House restaurant was held as they held the eighth annual meeting of the UHC, what became the URJ, and the dinner was held for the leaders of the movement. About 215 people showed up, and rabbis from all around the country uh, came. Was called the Trafa banquet not because they served pork, they didn't, but it included crabs, shrimp, frog legs, and it served meat and milk together. Uh, and the meat was not kosher. And so the reform movement, while they didn't serve pork, served pretty much everything else. And they called it the Trafa banquet. And people went nuts. The people who were there, who were followed tradition and followed kashrut, they got up, they walked out.
Mhm.
And it became a major split in the Jewish community. Again, Isaac Wise, the head of the reform movement, the way again 100% made these decisions and did this on purpose. He did this to force these people out. He
Wow.
did not want them there anymore. And this was uh again what would have happened to Judaism if this hadn't happened? I don't know. It's one of those kind of questions where like it was going to happen. It was going to happen no matter what. But this banquet led to the reform movement over the next couple of years coming up with, let's not just do things to piss people off. Let's actually tell people proactively what we believe. And this is the Pittsburgh platform. So this is the actual, this is the declaration of principles. And this is what the reform movement essentially held as what these are going to be reformed principles. And if you don't like it, this is not the place for you. The Union of American Hebrew Congress, which is not called Reform Judaism yet, they're now saying this is Reform Judaism, and they essentially said, um, here's what we believe about the Torah, right? Our Torah is the best example of people trying to understand God. By the way, I probably hold to this. I think it pretty much number one. I'm with it 100%. Uh, this is an interesting line. We hold that the modern discoveries of scientific researches in the domain of nature and history are not antagonistic to the doctrines of Judaism, the Bible reflecting the primitive ideas of its own age, and at times clothing its conception of divine providence, justice, dealing with men in miraculous narratives. John Stolman.
I know. I'm reading it.
So, also, I don't love the language there, but I'd agree with most of that, right? I'd agree with most of that, which is, hey, we got to take into consideration modern science. Calling that's probably today too. We don't like to call our ways primitive, right? We don't like to say the way we were at the time was primitive, but you know, that's what came out of that. Um, so um, what else do we want to say? We hold. Oh wait, no, I can't go over this. We recognize that in the Mosaic legislation, a system of training the Jewish people for its mission and during its national life in Palestine, right? You see right there in Palestine. And today we accept as binding only its moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies as elevate and sanctify our lives, but reject all such that are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization. So if you're doing something that wearing a tallis, for example, you don't need to do that anymore. We don't wear those anymore. So we don't need to do that. And when it comes to diet and dress and all those kind of things, you got to be holy, but
Cheeseburgers are okay.
he doesn't say that, but it says that it is not necessarily incumbent on modern human beings. Now, this I don't believe. And unfortunately, there are people in the reform movement and conservative movement for that matter today. And by the way, at this point, there might have been Orthodox Jews in the 1880s who would have said this. This is important, folks. We recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect the approaching of the realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all men. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. Oh, yeah.
If you go back to that page you were just on
Yep.
and go to number 5,
Yep.
I find that pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's the halakha. That's the part of that's we talked about the dress and the food, keeping kosher, all those kind of things. I mean, all
No,
of
no,
that.
no. Number 5. Number 5.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what I was talking about. Oh, I was looking at 3. Yes, 5. That was my eyes. Yes, 5 is what I was just we were just talking about. Yeah, that's
Yeah, but it actually says political Zionism, against modern political Zionism.
okay. That's the way they summarize it. Yes, but it's true. That's political Zionism. They were anti-Zionist. We are no longer a nation. That was the quote. That's what we just read. And we don't. And again, you can see they called it Palestine at that time. It was not an issue. They used the term. They used the name. But no one knew it would be called Israel in 1885. But you can see in 1885 they didn't think that was going to be necessary. Now, I will say this, folks. Like many Jews in 1885, including maybe some of our grandparents, great grandparents, etc., the idea that Jews would actually be able to achieve a land of their own in the land of Israel was a dream. And then we know, for those of you who are with us, this is the same time, the 1880s, when the first yeshuv was starting. So he knew it. Everybody knew that there were Jews that were being funded, you know.
So, Rabbi, I have a question.
But hold on one second. Let me just say this though. But it wasn't just that they were saying we don't need Israel anymore. They honestly believed in an alternative, folks, which is the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect, the approaching realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of kingdom of truth, justice, and peace for all people. So they believed in 1880 without, again, being able to see 50 years in advance to see the rise of Nazism. They actually believed that because of some of the early forms of socialism, some of the early, the nascent forms of democracy that were spreading in other parts of the world, they really thought that this was going to be achieved without Israel being necessary, that everyone was going to be able to live in peace and freedom. But so they weren't just saying we don't need Israel. They were saying we don't need Israel because the whole world is going to be essentially living like the vision of the prophets in Israel. So
Yeah, but
don't think that they were just saying we don't need Israel. This was Israel's realization that hope met the age of the Messiah is what they're talking about. That, by the way, I can make the argument. I mean, I totally disagree with this because of the way the history played out, but I know that now, 100 years later, 100, and, I'm not, I have the ability to see the future that they couldn't see. I lived it. You lived it.
I, I,
But the idea that the world would be at peace, I might have said that. I might have said
no,
that in 1880. I
I,
might
would-
have said in 1880, maybe the whole world will be free one day, soon. I don't know.
I would have told him he was an idiot back then. Um, Look, there were men and women and children, young people. What would they have said? Men, women, and young people were still living essentially in the former concentration camps 2 and 3 years after the end of World War II. They were stateless. They had nowhere to go. As John Stillman has pointed out, the United States wasn't taking them.
yeah, but that was 50 years later.
Yeah, but in
In
1880,
1885, Herzl,
in 1880s, what was happening, guys, is they were flooding into New York, and they knew it. It's not like they didn't see it. They saw this wave of immigrants that had just started coming in the 1880s. So they knew that American Jewry was going to grow. I don't think they imagined the next 40
But
years, which is
didn't they know what was happening in Europe with
they
They were
knew,
pogroms?
they
no,
knew,
that's
yes.
50.
they
But
knew.
Philip, there were Jews in America in the 1880s, especially people like these German Jews who guys, remember something. Karl Marx was a German Jew. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And wait. 1885, Herzl was just getting started.
Correct.
He was just
Correct.
getting started. So these
It
guys,
was it was 12 years before the first Zionist Congress.
and so
But by the way, you can understand why 12 years later there were still not a lot of Reformed Jews that showed up at his first Zionist Congress. Do you understand? The people who came there were not religious Jews. They were not Reformed Jews. They were just Jews who said we have to have something.
I mean, the
Yeah.
Balfour Declaration was, it would still be 25 years before World War One.
Again, yes, and that also take into consideration.
You think, I mean, here, Germany wasn't even unified. They were busy. City states were busy fighting each other. You'd think
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
from
no,
Germany, they realized that,
this is you're right. This is still Prussia and
yeah.
these are still Prussia, Bohemia, Bavaria. This is still not a unified Germany. I mean, parts of it had become, but yeah, Prussia and Bavaria fought wars against
I
each
looked
other.
up his menu online.
Yeah,
I kind of liked it, but I have to say, I think he was naive.
yeah. Well, they wanted to blow out the more traditional folks in their community, and they did because the next year after. Oh, by the way, just a couple other things here. Judaism is a progressive religion, right? It's interesting, by the way. This is a very bold statement, I think. Christianity and Islam being daughter religions of Judaism, we appreciate their providential mission to aid in the spreading of monotheistic and moral truth, right? So like this really affirms that there are kids, we're their father, so or their parent. So we that's a pretty bold statement, right? They also, by the way, don't like the idea. They like the idea that we have a soul, but they don't like the idea that that there's a heaven or hell. So when people talk about Judaism rejecting heaven and hell, It's pretty much the reform movement. It's pretty much really only articulated in this type of statement. You will not find this statement that exists today in the reform movement. This is not the last word on the reform Jewish principles. There have been many statements since this, but this was the one that created the break between reform and conservative Judaism. Because the next year, in 1886, Jewish Theological Seminary is founded by a couple of those people who walked right out of that place. They were predominantly, initially, most of the JTS people were Sephardic Jews. And it was, at the time, very close to some of the Sephardic congregations in Philadelphia and in New York. And they really wanted to create a congregation that a seminary that would help create congregations that would hew more towards tradition. And and so it's founded in 1886. It's very small originally. Um, and whether or not it's even going to exist is a big question. But what happens is they brought in 1902, they brought in an amazing Jew, amazing, to me, one of the most amazing Jews of all time, a guy by the name of Solomon Schechter. And Solomon Schechter was a British rabbi who was also originally from Europe, from Romania. And he came to England, was had a amazing um, knowledge of Jewish history. He worked at Cambridge. He's responsible for bringing the Cairo Geniza, which was the rabbinic the synagogue repository of letters that went back 1,000 years. It was from Egypt. It was at the synagogue in Egypt. It was rescued and brought um, to Cambridge. He studied it there. He hired rabbis and scholars to help copy it and decipher it. He was like an amazing scholar, but he also understood. And when he moved to the United States to take over at JTS, he was able to create a um, he was able to create really the conservative movement. And JTS is again in
And education. He
upper
did a
west
lot
side
with
of
education.
New York. And yes, and he brought scholarship, and he brought a high level of scholarship, but again with an understanding of respect for the tradition that would become the hallmark of conservative Judaism. Now, as we're kind of running out of time, but I will tell you this. Will give me another few minutes. The conservative movement under Schechter now becomes a reality. Like, again, could it have survived elsewhere? Nobody knows, because Orthodox Judaism also started during this time to grow and to become a movement, because it wasn't a movement until the Reformed Jews. There were Orthodox rabbis at that Pittsburgh platform too, at the Trafa banquet, who responded to being essentially thrown out. And so the Orthodox movement starts their seminary, Yeshiva University in New York as well. And these two seminaries grow as New York grows. And they're part of um, a result also of geography and of history, which is that these movements become um, a reality because of the Jews that come, our families that come in the 1880s to the 1920s, and they fill up what will be the congregations. What Solomon Schechter did, and by the way, the conservative day school movement, all the conservative schools used to be called Solomon Schechter schools. Right, all around the country, there were Solomon Schechter schools that were the conservative movement's day schools, named after him because of what he did. But one of the most important, so he didn't start JTS, but he really made it. He made it real. And one of the things that he did in the mold of Isaac Mayer Wise is he started what's called United Synagogue. And United Synagogue was the URJ, UHC of the conservative movement. It was the organization of conservative congregations. And so he started United Synagogue, which of course is United USY is United Synagogue Youth, the youth group. United Synagogues, the United Synagogues of Conservative Judaism, the USCJ, was the umbrella organization for the reform for the conservative movement, and the conservative movement until about 20 years ago was the largest movement in America because again, those Jews, our families that came out of Russia and Poland and Eastern Europe in the 1880s to 1920s gravitated to the conservative movement as a middle way, as a way that wasn't orthodox but at the same time wasn't reform and was a home for Jews who felt comfortable there. Now, I will also tell you this. This is a fact. The conservative movement was funded by Reform Jews who also didn't want your and my family to come into their synagogues. They did not want poor Jews from Russia and Poland and Belarusia to go into their shuls. And so they were fine with paying them to have their own synagogues and to live a little bit more traditionally and just don't come into our synagogues. And so true. The United Synagogue and JTS were funded by wealthy Reform Jews. And the only reason they did it was because it wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. They really didn't want these people coming to their country club, so to speak. And they
And
saw the
at this
synagogue
time,
and they saw the synagogue as their country club. Yeah.
and Reform Jews at this time didn't have bar mitzvahs. You know,
Correct. Yeah,
confirmation.
that was one of the things that I did not tell you yet,
Yeah.
which is that yes, the reform movement under Isaac Wise rejected the idea of bar and bat mitzvah at 13 because, and again, I'm just going to say there was a logic to this, which is 13 in America, Jewish boys don't have, and again, at the time it was only Jewish boys, they didn't have any maturity. They didn't have the level of understanding to be bar mitzvah. So
We still don't.
correct. So he did away with that and created something called confirmation, which is usually around the same age. It's usually between 13 and 15. But what he also did is he made sure that girls could also participate in confirmation. And because confirmation didn't require the same type of Torah study and the same type of reading from the Torah, there wasn't that issue of, well, what are women going to do? So there were a lot of Reform synagogues where if they did read Torah, they oftentimes did it on Friday night, and they also wouldn't have women do it because the first Reform rabbi, who's a woman, isn't ordained until the 1970s. Sally Priceand, who's ordained as a Reform, and she's still alive. She's the first Reform and the first American woman rabbi. It still takes 70 years or almost 80 years for a Reform movement to ordain a woman. Now, interestingly, the first women rabbis who were ever ordained were in seminaries in Europe, in Germany. So Germany actually ordained women rabbis before the United States. Unfortunately, some of those women were killed during the Holocaust. But the conservative movement does grow tremendously as the Jewish community grows. And that is the map that I showed you at the beginning. And what I want to show you again today as we finish is that the conservative movement grows geographically with the Jewish community as it spreads across the country. And so it was really reflective of history and I would say, again, demographic trends, geography more than anything else. And again, it's not that there aren't theological and philosophical reasons for these movements to exist, but from a practical standpoint, when we look at the reform and conservative movements, they this is, and I've seen it in my own life. I grew up in a conservative congregation, and at the time, the conservative movement was the largest movement in the country. But today, both the Reform and the Orthodox movements are growing. The Reform movement is probably maxed out, but the largest group that's growing, of course, is unaffiliated people who are not part of any movement. And so when we talk about movements today, we did not mention the Reconstructionist movement. So let me just do that for one quick second. The Reconstructionist movement is the smallest movement in the United States of the four movements. And the Reconstructionist movement was started also essentially by one rabbi, though he never called himself Reconstructionist, and that's Mordecai Kaplan, who amazingly lived over 100 years. He was a rabbi also from Europe originally, who came to the United States, fell in love with the United States, and kind of reached his main time of preaching and leading people was during the war, during during the pre and post war period. So he lived in New York and he worked at worked and taught at JTS. But his students established a seminary, the Reconstructionist Seminary, which is in Philadelphia today, and so the Philadelphia suburbs. And so Reconstructionism really started in the 70s. And is a little bit more of a phenomenon, still not huge, but is more of a East Coast phenomena. You'll see a few more recon communities in the Philadelphia area. In New York, there's a couple of Reconstructionist communities. And of course, we have a couple here in Southern California. We have one, Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades. There's a Reconstruction synagogue in Orange County. There used to be one. I think it's still maybe functioning in San Diego. But the Reconstructionist movement really started under Kaplan's influence as a movement that, from a functional standpoint, which to some extent kind of hewed philosophically somewhere between the reform and conservative originally. It's kind of like almost like a middle between those two, but they were one of the early movements of to ordain women rabbis and do it at a major level. Mordecai Kaplan's daughter Judith Eisenstein was the first woman ever bat mitzvah in the United States. She was bat mitzvah about 75, 80 years ago. So she was the first woman. That's a trivia question. The first woman who ever celebrated a bat mitzvah. But the recon movement really kind of established itself as a very progressive politically movement, and it was one of the first to have women have a large role. They were also I believe, the first seminary that actually ordained an openly gay rabbi, and they've become more and more politically progressive to the point that they've actually, some of the Reconstructionist rabbis have split off from each other because of the recon movement, especially the seminary, has in their minds become quite anti-Israel. And so recently, Kehillat Israel here in Los Angeles voted to break away from the recon movement because of their stance on Israel. So KI is no longer, uh, I believe they voted to completely disassociate, um, and it was over their stance on Israel. It's not because of their and it's actually the long it's right now ki, this was last year, ki, by the way, amazingly wasn't burned down. I mean, everything else around it burned down in Palisades, but it's the largest reconstructionist congregation in the country, and they voted to cut its ties with the denominational body over its position on Israel. And it's not because it's not a progressive congregation. Its head rabbi is lesbian, and has always felt comfortable, as a gay rabbi, to lead a large congregation. And KI is a large congregation, very affluent. I mean, it's got Adam Sandler's a member there, Billy Crystal, and it's got very wealthy celebrity members. And yeah, they basically said we couldn't affiliate with the Reconstructionist movement anymore. So that's but I would say that one of the things that I think Kaplan really needs to be recognized for was his understanding of America, American Judaism, America's amazing history, and the possibilities of America. He was a big believer in it. And he was one of the early proponents of creating Jewish community centers, whether they were called Ys or JCCs. He really believed that Judaism needed to have centers that weren't just synagogues, but also places where Jews came together to cook, to eat, to work out, to play games, all that kind of stuff. So he was a real believer in American society. He loved the United States. And when you read Kaplan's writings, the guy just loved the U.S. I mean, I don't know if how he would have felt with kind of like understanding, what happened with our administrations during World War II, but he was a big believer in the United States. Kaplan was, and I think all of the leaders of the movements in the United States were were real believers in America. Solomon Schechter, again, the founder of, for all intents and purposes, of conservative Judaism, once said that it's going to be very important for the rabbis in the United States to know as much about baseball as they know about the Talmud. He didn't quite say it like that, but that's essentially what he said, because he said they need to understand, our rabbis need to understand both the history and the law of our people, but also a culture of the United States. So I think I think Schechter was right on the money there. I think I know more about baseball probably than Tallman, but I do understand what his what he meant by that, supposedly, that comment that he made. So I I want to say one thing about the Orthodox movement, because I didn't really talk about it. The Orthodox movement to some extent in the United States, and again to look at where Orthodox Jews are, it is a uh, to some extent always been a reaction to Reformation, towards again saying we're going to keep tradition, we're going to keep halacha, and as Jews have figured out, kind of the limits of how far we can go, which I think we've tested the pendulum. We've kind of seen how far we can go, and still maintain some Jewish tradition and Jewish connection. I think we know that we understand where the boundary is here, but Orthodox Judaism has always kind of found its strength and its reason for existence in making sure that people would have a home for traditional Judaism, as again in some cases after having experimented or been far outside Jewish tradition. So there's a lot of people who we call Baal Teshuvah who make up um, Orthodox congregations. Baal Teshuvah literally means an owner of repentance, a possessor of repentance. But Baal Teshuvah traditionally meant someone who was Orthodox, who became less Orthodox, who then came back to Orthodoxy. But oftentimes we call a BT, or Baal Teshuvah, somebody who essentially becomes a born again Jew, who becomes an Orthodox Jew after not being Orthodox. And there's a lot of us who've made that decision. They've lived non-orthodox lives, non-halakhic lives, and decide to opt towards that. So there's a reason for it. There's Orthodox Jews who decide not to be living a halakhic life. I don't like to say religious, by the way. You notice that. I think that, and I'm not the only person who says this. You should not say that if somebody is not Orthodox that they're not religious. We have a tendency to do that. It's the language, semantics, but it does matter. When you say someone's not religious, what you meant was is they weren't Torah observant, or they weren't halachic, they weren't following halacha, they weren't following Jewish law as law. But to say someone who's I mean, I consider myself a religious Jew. I don't consider myself an Orthodox Jew. I don't consider myself a halachic Jew, but I consider myself a deeply religious Jew. So I think it's important for Reform Jews or progressive Jews or everyone who's not necessarily Orthodox not to refer to themselves as I'm not religious. I'm not really religious, because what you're saying is you're not observant. You're not halachic. You don't live by Jewish law, but you're not religious. So I try not to use that term. Sometimes I use it just for the sake of standardization and communication, but it's not right. We can call ourselves a non-observant Jew, or a progressive Jew, or a non-Orthodox Jew, but you shouldn't really refer to yourself as not religious, if even if you're if even if you're not observing kashrut or things like that. So I will tell you that today much of what we consider Orthodox Judaism is actually Chabad, and that's not really Orthodox Judaism. Chabad is Hasidic Judaism. It's a breakaway from Orthodoxy, as we talked about, and when we talked about European Jewry. Hasidism is its own thing, but they've essentially become the de facto Orthodox movement, because the mainstream Orthodox it's such a small percentage of the community that uh, a lot of what we call Orthodox synagogues are really Chabad, and they're preserving, if you will, Orthodox Judaism, even though in the 1880s and the 1850s, the Orthodox Jews of Europe were persecuting Hasidic Jews for being non-Orthodox, for being not observant. So it's funny how they're now the standard bearers, if you will, of Orthodox Judaism, and it is it's definitely going to be interesting to see what the Jewish community will look like, what the landscape of American Jewry will look like 20 years from now, because the Orthodox will make up a larger percentage of affiliated or identifiable Jews, but I don't know that that will have a fundamentally different effect of on what American Jewry looks like. I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine it. I don't know what it'll be. To me, if you ask me right now, I think that in 25, 30 years, all of these kinds of movements are going to be un they're going to be unrecognizable, and they're not going to be of any issue. There are going to be two kinds of Jews in the United States. There will be anti-Zionist Jews and there will be Zionist Jews. Okay? That's it. There'll be people who identify that Israel is a part of their Jewishness, their Judaism, their religion, their observance, their identity, and there will be people who reject Israel. And Jews will identify more along politics and more along their association with Israel than they will in their movements, because the movements will be so small and they'll be so, to some extent, ineffectual that it won't really matter. And it will matter what an average Jewish person feels when it comes to these kind of issues. And again, I think it will spill over not just to Israel. I think Zionist Jews wind up being, having certain kinds of beliefs or certain kinds of practices, and non-Zionist Jews will have anti-Zionist Jews will have their practices and their ways. But I think that'll be the more definitive. If you ask me, as a if I'm putting on my cloak of a prophet, that's what I think will happen. Now, if you
Well, the
ask me,
reform movement, the conservative movement has become more like each other,
yeah,
much more.
yeah, the movements are basically, they're unified in most ways, except for one thing, which is patrilineal descent. The conservative movement still doesn't acknowledge patrilineal descent as a determining factor for Jewishness. They still hold it has to be the mother. I believe at some point the conservative movement will acquiesce on that. It's already starting to happen. Some conservative synagogues, the rabbis are even performing interfaith marriages, which was a major break from conservative Judaism. The writing's on the wall. Eventually, those synagogues and those
Will merge,
communities
yeah.
will merge, and there will be no there will be no differentiation over that, because they won't conservative synagogues won't use that as a barrier anymore to come in. That's one of the reasons why Reform Judaism has thrived. And they know it. They know conservative Judaism knows that they've driven people out of their congregations because of their stance on interfaith marriage. So they know it, and it's too late for them to really do anything about it. They needed to do something 25, 30 years ago. It's too late. So by the time they address it, they're going to be irrelevant. Um, I'll finish with one thing that one of my uh, I would say I spent a little time with him, very little time with him, but I've read him and I've been influenced by his thinking. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who thankfully is still with us,
Oh,
he's in his
yeah.
90s now. But Yitz Greenberg has been an amazing rabbi. He established something called KLAL, which is the National Jewish Center for Leadership and Learning, and he was Orthodox. He was trained at the Orthodox Seminary at Yeshiva University. But again, one of these guys who came out of Brooklyn. He's 93 now. I'm just checking out. He's 93. But he went to Brooklyn College, but then he went on to Harvard. And he's just an amazing guy. His wife, Blue Greenberg, she wrote several really, and she thankfully is still alive. She wrote several books about Orthodox Jewish feminists. She was an Orthodox Jewish feminist. Wrote about how Jewish women can help their um,
And where is Sarna's college?
well, Sarna teaches at Brandeis.
Okay, American Judaism is a wonderful
Yeah,
book.
but he teaches American history. But
Yeah.
but Greenberg, has taught and really because of his work at Claw, um, he he really wanted people to think outside of the dominant denominations. He really wanted Jews to work together. I did an internship in rabbinical school with Claw, where they brought together rabbis from all the different seminaries, and so they brought them together, and they we did projects together, we taught together, we did conferences and stuff together. And one of the things that he said, which I thought was like the best way to summarize the movements in this country, he said, I don't care what movement you're a part of, as long as you're ashamed of it. And so
That's
I thought
great.
that was the best. To me, that like I heard that 30 something years ago, and it always stuck with me. I said, yeah, that's the way to look at it, because I'm not going to invest any time in this differentiation between them. It's one of the reasons why, I've worked real hard in our community to make sure that we always can come together. It's not always easy, folks. It's not, I mean, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dancing to keep us all together and to be able to have Chabad and CBS and ourselves doing events together. But we're really lucky. We're one of the few communities where that happens all the time, and people have gotten used to it. They kind of expect it, but it doesn't happen in most places in America. I mean, if it happens in a really, really small town. But for it to happen in a place like Santa Clarita, which is it's small, but it's also we're part of a much bigger, we're part of a wider America, Los Angeles Jewish community, and a part of a Western Jewish community that again, there's a lot of differences between ourselves and some of our Orthodox brothers and sisters. But when it comes down to things like Israel, when it comes down to Jewish continuity, it comes down to protecting ourselves. Look, the reason we have a Krav Maga class that meets at our place and at Chabad and at CBS, because we wanted people to feel safe and secure in a post October 7th. Should we have had Krav Maga for the last? Of course, should have had it for 30 years. But people reacted, we did it, and now we're doing it. And the fact that we share that resource and we're able to look at it like this is a win for everybody. Hey, that's why we do it. So it happens so often that we don't you and I we take it for granted and we don't even talk about it that much, but it works because we see the value in every movement, and we also, I think all of us know, hey, we're not gonna fight that. Our movements is not the hill we're gonna die on. And so it works, and I hope the rest of the American Jewish community, continues to or grows into this idea that movements are, there's a place for them. I think they kind of serve their need during the 20s and 30s, and maybe even up, you could say, after the war. But at this point now, it's a waste. A lot of the interaction and a lot of the infrastructure is counterproductive. So we need to focus on what's important: Jewish knowledge, Jewish continuity, under educating Jews, keeping the next generation strong and secure and knowledgeable, and feeling loved, being part of Jewish youth groups and those guys. That's all. That's all what has to be the priority. We can't be spending money on. Well, we have to strengthen the reform movement. I mean, what does that mean? We got to strengthen American Jewish community. So that's why, again, really lucky we have that here. We've had great cooperation, and I'm preaching to the choir, but that's why we
And
do
we
it.
have so many unaffiliated Jews too that aren't part of
Right.
anything at all.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, everybody. We spent a little bit more time. I had no idea. Well, first of all, I didn't know we were going to talk about. I when I initially scheduled this, I didn't know we were going to have the MOU. We had to talk about that. I mean, look, it's a major thing. It's been weighing on all of us since February. This is the end of February when this war started. Is how does it end? And I think it's ended, but it also hasn't ended at the end of the day. And when we talk about American Judaism, we have to talk about this. To some extent, I wish we didn't have to, because I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about movement stuff, but you need to know it. You need to know the history and why we are where we are today, and why it's important for us to focus on the bigger picture right now, which is making sure that our community feels strong, and that the next generation of Jews in America feels strong, because we got a lot of work to do. We got kids now who I never thought were going to have to experience the level of anti-Semitism, the level of I mean, unbelievable anti-Semitism, as kids, 6, 7-year-old kids, whose parents are telling me that they're getting bullied at school. I mean, this is a nightmare, folks.
And,
This is
and,
not.
and we haven't even talked about Gwyneth.
Well, Gwyneth, yes, Gwyneth. What can you say, guys? Gwyneth is a hero now. I think she's done the right thing. I'm hoping that other Jewish actors will follow suit. Look, let them do whatever they want. Look, just so you know, Philip, he's talking about Gwyneth Paltrow, of course, coming out and doing the ad for the Park 51 project in Herzliya, and she took a lot of flack for doing that. She knew she would. She did it anyways. I want to make it clear 3 years ago, well, no, almost 3 years ago, I don't remember when I did it. I met with the Israel government to see if they would help fund bringing celebrities to Israel, like my dad did back in the 80s. And the Israeli government, the office here, the consulate, 100% said they would fund it. We got down to the specifics of how many people, like if we take a celebrity, an A-list celebrity, how many people can come. We're going to let them bring two people in their entourage, a spouse or partner and a personal assistant. We had it all worked out. Done. It was done. Uh, Not one A-list celebrity wanted to go. So we got a lot of work to do, and I hope that Gwyneth opened the door and shows. I hope. Look, I don't know. I hope that we get some other celebrities who are going to step up now that maybe as the fighting uh, is not as intensified as it will be. That again, and we got a trip in Israel, folks, in November. I mean, we want people to start rebooking for that trip because we after February we had a bunch of people. We had 25 people that signed up for it before February. We've had not one person sign up for it. Maybe that's not true. We had one couple sign up for it
I'm
from San
booked.
Francisco. I know you're booked, but I'm telling
I
you,
have my airfare. I'm going no matter what.
we have had no bookings, substantial bookings since February. So let's
I'm
hope
going.
that people book, and let's hope that we're able to bring at least ourselves to Israel. So again, November 8th is our departure. Come back on the 18th, and you'll be back in time for Thanksgiving. So come with us to Israel and tell your friends and tell people about the trip because it's time now to book. It's July, almost July. So let's get people booking for that trip. But we definitely have enough people, but let's make it, the last trip that we took in this last trip we took in July, we did not have enough people. We should have not gone on that trip with Joe, but I wanted to bring Joe there, and I definitely wanted the people of Israel to have that experience of having American Jews come there. But let's get serious. Let's go to Israel and let's get our people who haven't been there, make sure that they go there. And I mean, hats off to Gwyneth. Whether you like Goop or not, whether you like her as an actress or not, whatever, the woman did something really heroic, and you need to recognize that. And she really should be commended and congratulated on being a Jew who wouldn't back down. I love it.
Rabbi, before the trip in November, I'm wondering if I'm not saying Sorrel because my experience wasn't that great. I mean, it was fine. Don't get me wrong. I was just whatever. That maybe we come up with some type of like we all go. I don't know, and people volunteer for a week before Shabbos, and then we start the trip or something, or a few days. I don't know. Just a thought. Just a thought.
I'll talk to you about that offline.
Okay.
But it's a great idea. It's always a good idea if someone wants to volunteer to go to Sarel. I know you didn't have a great experience, but
Well, no. I had a fun experience with
Yeah.
Steve. It was just the room,
I know, I know.
the accommodations.
I know. Well, if you go there with that understanding, but again, Rob Hershenson did Sarel. Sarel is the Volunteers for Israel, where you help out on a military base. It's a great experience. Look, Joyce, who's on the line right now, she went there and participated in digs, in some archaeological digs. There's a lot of ways to experience Israel besides our trips. I definitely don't want to even like begin to tell you. There's a million different ways to go to Israel. But
I'm
we're going to
happy-
make it easy. We're going to make it easy for you if you want to come in November. Yeah.
I'm happy to pick oranges and tangerines again.
That's right. That's right. Philip and John picked oranges for a couple hours.
Those were good too.
Yeah, they were. They were great.
All right,
bye.
folks. Well, we'll see you come Friday
All right.
for
See
the
you.
for the Mikey Shabbat, and we'll
see
see
you
you
Friday.
if you're not back on in 3 weeks. We'll be back on or whatever. After 3 weeks, we're off the next 3 weeks. So 4 weeks, we'll be back on July, whatever it is, like 15th. And so we'll miss you if we don't see you in person. And
Peace
All right,
out.
we'll see you later.
see
Thanks,
you soon,
Rabbi.
everybody.
Goodbye,
Take care.
Rabbi.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, everybody.